I'd like to come back to this example, and I would like to interpret both the type 1 and type 2 errors. If we were to commit those, how would we interpret these and how would we state these if we were to commit these? So with the peanut example, remember the peanut example says the type 1 error says that we move down here to the alternative when the null is true. So the way I will interpret the type 1 error is that we are saying that the mean production of peanuts is 3,000 pounds per acre, when in fact the production of peanuts is 3,000 pounds per acre. So the type 1 error, so if we were to commit the type 1 error, we are saying that the mean yield of peanuts is greater than 3,000 pounds per acre when in fact the mean yield of peanuts is 3,000 pounds per acre. So that's the interpretation of the type 1 error. The type 2 error, well, the type 2 error is when we fail to reject the null hypothesis. So the null hypothesis was mu equals 3,000 pounds, when in fact the mean yield is greater than 3,000 pounds. So the type 2 error, then, we will say that the mean yield of peanuts is 3,000 pounds per acre when in fact the mean yield is greater than 3,000 pounds per acre. Okay. So here we're coming back and saying, wow, we're getting more peanuts than we really are getting for a type 1 error. For the type 2 error, you're coming back and saying that we're actually getting less peanuts than we're actually getting. So that's the type 1 and the type 2 error. Does that make sense? So this one here, if we were to commit the type 1 error, remember the type 1 error is saying that we are saying that the mean yield remission time is not equal to 12.5 weeks, when in fact the remission time is 12.5 weeks. Would be the type 1 error. So here we're coming back and saying for the type 1, we're saying that the mean remission time is different than 12.5 weeks. When in fact the mean remission time is 12.5 weeks. So hopefully you can see you're coming back and saying the mean remission time is different than 12.5 weeks, when in fact the mean remission time is 12.5 weeks. You could probably see that if you tell somebody that it's different when in fact it is, they might get a little disgruntled, if you will. The type 2 error says that you're accepting the null when the alternative is true. So if you're failing to reject the null when the alternative is true, then what you're saying is that the mean remission time is 12.5 weeks. When in fact the mean remission time is different than 12.5 weeks. So that would be the type 2 error interpretation of this one. Okay? You guys with me? You together? Like mine? Appear to this slide. This class exercise. The cadmium, a heavy metal, is toxic to animals. Mushrooms, however, are able to absorb and accumulate cadmium in high concentrations. The Czech and Slovak governments have set a safety limit for cadmium in dried vegetables at 0.5 parts per million. These guys did a study and a hypothesis test is being performed to decide whether the mean cadmium level in these mushrooms is greater than the government's recommended limit. So what I'd like for you to do is to state the null and the alternative, interpret the type 1 error, and interpret the type 2 error. So why don't we take about 3 or 4. Alrighty. Well, for this one, I came up with the following. So for the null hypothesis, I came up with mu equals 0.5. And for the alternative hypothesis, mu is greater than 0.5. For the type 1 error, then we are saying that the alternative is true. So we are saying that the mean cadmium levels are greater than 0.5 parts per million, when in fact the mean cadmium levels are 0.5 ppm. So that would be the type 1 error. The type 2 error, well, we are saying that the mean cadmium levels are 0.5 parts per million, when in fact the mean cadmium levels are greater than 0.5 parts per million.